Karoline Leavitt sighed with relief as she stepped out onto her back patio. The summer sun beat down on her neighborhood in Westfield, making the air shimmer above the concrete. It was the kind of hot day that made her grateful for the investment she had made in her backyard pool last year. The water sparkled blue and inviting, a personal oasis that had cost her 3 years of careful saving. She placed her towel on the lounge chair and adjusted her sunglasses. Saturday was her only day to truly relax. Working as a small business owner meant her weekdays were filled with stress and responsibility. These peaceful weekend hours by her pool were sacred to her. Karoline dipped her toe into the water, enjoying the cool sensation against her skin. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her sister Diane asking about their plans for the family cookout next weekend. Karoline realized she needed to grab her planner from inside to check her schedule. She also wanted to get her water bottle from the fridge. The heat made staying hydrated important. Just a quick trip inside, she muttered to herself, heading back toward her sliding glass door. The cool air conditioning hit her as she stepped inside. Karoline took a moment to enjoy the temperature change before heading to the kitchen. She filled her water bottle with ice and filtered water, then grabbed her planner from the counter where she had left it that morning. A movement in her backyard caught her eye through the kitchen window. Karoline squinted, not quite believing what she was seeing. A woman in a wide-brimmed hat was setting up a chair by her pool. Not just any woman. Nancy Winters, her neighbor from 3 houses down. Nancy, who always had something to say about everyone else's business at the neighborhood meetings. Nancy, who had made several comments over the garden fence about excessive displays of wealth when Karoline had the pool installed. Karoline watched in disbelief as Nancy unfolded not 1 but 2 more chairs. Moments later, 2 other women Karoline recognized from the neighborhood walked through her side gate carrying tote bags and towels. They were Patty Miller and Joan Hanson, both friends of Nancy, who shared her habit of criticizing others while acting superior. "You have got to be kidding me," Karoline whispered, her relaxing Saturday suddenly turning into something else entirely. She watched as the 3 women made themselves comfortable on her patio furniture. Nancy pulled out a magazine and began to fan herself dramatically. Patty dipped her feet into Karoline's pool, while Joan unpacked what looked like snacks and drinks onto Karoline's side table. Karoline took a deep breath to calm herself. Maybe there was some mistake. Perhaps they thought she had invited them over. But no, she had never been particularly friendly with these women, and they had certainly never been invited to use her pool. She walked back outside, trying to keep her expression neutral despite her growing anger. "Excuse me," Karoline said as she stepped onto the patio. "What are you doing in my backyard?" Nancy lowered her sunglasses and looked at Karoline with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hello. There. We were just so hot and we saw you weren't using your pool. It seemed a shame to let it go to waste on such a scorching day." Patty nodded enthusiastically. "We thought you wouldn't mind sharing. It's so selfish to keep cool water all to yourself when the temperature is nearly 100 degrees. Joan was already pulling out sunscreen. "Besides, we're neighbors. Neighbors should share with each other, right? That's what community is all about." Karoline stood perfectly still, trying to process the audacity of these women. They had walked into her private property without permission, and were now acting as if she was the one being unreasonable. "I'm sorry, but this is my private property," Karoline said firmly. "I didn't invite anyone over today because I wanted some quiet time to myself." Nancy let out a laugh that sounded more like a scoff. "Oh, Karoline, don't be so uptight. There's plenty of pool for everyone, we won't bother you." "That's not the point," Karoline replied, feeling her temper rising. "The point is that you can't just walk into someone's backyard without being invited. Would you like it if I walked into your house and started using your things without asking?" Nancy sat up straighter, her face hardening. "That's hardly the same thing. A pool is outside. Besides, in a fair society, resources should be shared, not hoarded by those who can afford them while others suffer in the heat." Karoline couldn't believe what she was hearing. This isn't about fair society or resources. This is about basic respect for private property and personal boundaries. "Listen to yourself," Nancy said loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "So protective of your little luxury while working-class families in this neighborhood don't even have air conditioning. This is exactly what's wrong with this country. People like you who don't understand the concept of helping others. Patty nodded along. Nancy's right. You have all this space and a beautiful pool. Would it really hurt you to share? It's the neighborly thing to do. Karoline noticed Mrs. Bennett, her elderly neighbor on the other side, peering over the fence, with interest. Great, now this was becoming a public spectacle. I help others in many ways, Karoline said, trying to keep her voice level. I donate to charities, I volunteer at the community center, and I respect other people's property and privacy, something you clearly don't understand. Joan rolled her eyes. Oh, please, spare us the speech about your generosity. We're just trying to cool off on a hot day. It's not like we're stealing your jewelry. Nancy stood up now, pointing a finger at Karoline. You know what your problem is? You've bought into this whole capitalist idea that everything has to be owned and controlled. If we were in Europe, neighborhoods would share pools and gardens. It's only in America where people are so obsessed with what's mine versus what's yours. Karoline felt a headache coming on. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. Nancy was clearly using this situation to make some kind of political statement, and Karoline had become her unwilling opponent. Whether you agree with private property as a concept or not, Karoline said carefully, the fact remains that I paid for this pool with money I earned working 60-hour weeks for years. I maintain it, I clean it, I pay for the chemicals and the electricity to run the filter. And legally, this is my property. Nancy smirked. Oh, here we go with the I worked hard for what I have story. Some of us work hard too, but don't get the same opportunities. Karoline looked at the three women who had invaded her space and were now making her feel guilty for asking them to leave. She noticed they all carried expensive designer bags and wore what looked like costly jewelry. The irony wasn't lost on her. I'm going to ask you once more to please pack up your things and leave my property, Karoline said, her patience wearing thin. If you'd like to discuss setting up some kind of neighborhood pool schedule in the future, we can bring that up at the next community meeting. But right now you're trespassing. Nancy stood up dramatically, making a show of gathering her things. Come on, ladies. Clearly Karoline doesn't understand the meaning of community. Let's go. As they slowly packed their bags, making disapproving noises and exchanging meaningful glances, Karoline stood firm by her sliding door. She watched as they finally made their way out through her side gate, Nancy turning to give her one last, disapproving look. When they were gone, Karoline sat down heavily on her lounge chair. Her peaceful Saturday was ruined. She could feel herself shaking slightly with a mixture of anger and disbelief. What kind of person walks into someone else's backyard and uses their pool without permission, and then has the nerve to make the homeowner feel bad about asking them to leave? Karoline looked at her phone and saw 3 missed calls from Diane. Her sister would not believe what had just happened. As she was about to call her back, Karoline noticed Nancy standing on her back porch next door, talking animatedly to another neighbor and pointing in Karoline's direction. This wasn't over, Karoline realized. Nancy was already spinning the story to make Karoline look like the villain. She needed to think carefully about how to handle this situation before it escalated further. One thing was certain, she wasn't going to let Nancy Winters get away with this behavior, not this time. Karoline spent the rest of her Saturday in a state of disbelief. What should have been a peaceful day by her pool had turned into a stressful confrontation. She called her sister Diane and explained what happened. They just walked into your backyard and used your pool? Diane asked, her voice rising with each word. Without asking? Who does that? Nancy Winters, that's who, Karoline replied, looking out her window to make sure Nancy and her friends hadn't returned. And she made me feel like I was the bad guy for asking them to leave. That's ridiculous, Diane said. What are you going to do about it? Karoline sighed. I don't know yet, but I need to do something. This isn't just about using my pool without permission. Nancy is turning this into some kind of political statement about sharing resources and community property. After hanging up with her sister, Karoline noticed more activity outside. From her kitchen window, she could see Nancy talking to other neighbors, gesturing toward Karoline's house. By Sunday morning, Karoline received several odd looks when she went to get her mail. Betty from across the street, usually friendly and Chatty barely waved before hurrying inside her house. On Monday morning, Karoline found a note taped to her mailbox. It read, "Community meeting, Wednesday 7 p.m., discussing neighborhood resources and community spirit, Town Hall." The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Nancy was clearly planning something. Karoline went to work at her small gift shop, downtown, trying to focus on her business rather than neighborhood drama. Around lunchtime, her friend Melissa Baker stopped by. Melissa worked at the local newspaper and often came in to browse during her lunch break. "You look stressed," Melissa said, leaning against the counter while Karoline arranged a display of handmade candles. "Is it that obvious?" Karoline asked with a weak smile. "To me it is. Want to talk about it?" Karoline told Melissa about the pool incident and the community meeting notice. Melissa's eyes widened as she listened. "Nancy Winters. I know her. She's always writing letters to the editor about community issues. Last month she wanted the city to force Mr. Peterson to cut down his oak tree because the acorns were falling in her yard." "That sounds like Nancy," Karoline said. "She's turning this into a big deal, making me look like some selfish rich person who won't share. But Melissa, I worked extra jobs for 3 years to save for that pool. It's not like I'm swimming in money." Melissa nodded thoughtfully. "You know, this might be about more than just your pool. Nancy runs that local Facebook group, Fair Community Resources. She's always looking for situations she can use to push her agenda." "Great," Karoline groaned. "So I'm just her latest example." "Don't worry," Melissa said, squeezing her friend's hand. "I have an idea. My cousin Greg is a police officer. Why don't we talk to him about trespassing laws? Not to get Nancy in trouble, but just so you know your rights." That evening, Melissa brought Greg Powell to Karoline's house. Greg was a community police officer with a friendly face and calm manner. They sat in Karoline's living room as she explained the situation again. "Legally, this is straightforward," Greg said after listening. "They trespassed on private property. You could file a report if you wanted to." "I don't want to make things worse," Karoline said. "I just want Nancy to respect my property and stop painting me as the villain in her community crusade." Greg nodded. "I understand. Filing a report might escalate things, but knowing your rights is important." He pulled out a small notepad. "Here's what you need to know. Your property line is clearly marked by your fence. Anyone entering without permission is trespassing. You have the right to ask them to leave, and if they refuse, you can call the police." "What about the community meeting?" Melissa asked. "Nancy's clearly planning something." "That's where we need to be strategic," Greg said. "Nancy thinks she has the upper hand because she's framing this as a community issue, but we can turn this around." They spent the next hour planning. By the time Greg and Melissa left, Karoline felt more confident. Instead of dreading the community meeting, she was actually looking forward to it. Tuesday passed quickly. Karoline spotted Nancy and her friends huddled together at the local coffee shop, probably planning their attack for the meeting. Rather than feeling intimidated, Karoline smiled and waved, which seemed to confuse Nancy. On Wednesday evening, Karoline arrived at the town hall 20 minutes early. The small meeting room was already half full. Nancy sat in the front row with Patty and Joan, all three wearing matching blue Community First buttons. They shot smug looks at Karoline as she entered. Mr. Benson, the neighborhood association president, called the meeting to order at exactly 7 p.m. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We have several items on our agenda, but first, Nancy Winters has asked to speak about community resources." Nancy walked to the front of the room with practiced confidence. She smiled at the crowd of about 30 neighbors. "Friends and neighbors, I called for this meeting because I believe we need to discuss how we share our community resources. These difficult times, we should think about the greater good rather than just ourselves." She went on to talk about community gardens and tool-sharing programs in other neighborhoods. Then she got to her real point. Some of us have luxuries like private pools while others suffer in the heat. Last Saturday, a few of us were simply trying to cool off during the heat wave. We thought our neighbor wouldn't mind sharing her pool for a short time since she wasn't using it. But instead of showing community spirit, we were treated like criminals and ordered to leave. Murmurs filled the room. Nancy had carefully avoided mentioning that she entered Karoline's property without permission. Several people looked at Karoline with disapproval. I propose we create a neighborhood pool sharing program, Nancy continued. Those with private pools could sign up to host community swim days. It would bring us all closer together. Mr. Benson thanked Nancy and asked if anyone else wanted to speak. This was the moment Karoline had prepared for. She stood up and walked to the front, carrying a folder Melissa had helped her prepare. Thank you, Nancy, for bringing up community resources. Karoline began calmly. I agree that sharing is important. That's why I was surprised to learn that our wonderful community pool just 3 blocks from here has been operating at half capacity all summer. She opened her folder and showed a chart Greg had helped her create. According to the Parks Department, membership is down 30% this year. The community pool offers affordable day passes and family memberships. Karoline looked directly at Nancy. Interestingly, Nancy and her friends who were so desperate to cool off have never purchased passes, despite living closer to the community pool than anyone else in this room. Nancy's face reddened as people turned to look at her. I believe in community resources, Karoline continued. I volunteer at the community garden every month. I donate to the town library. But I also believe in respecting private property and personal boundaries. She took a deep breath. What happened on Saturday wasn't about sharing resources. It was about 3 people entering my private property without permission while I was inside my house. When I returned and asked them to leave, they refused and tried to shame me. Greg stood up from his seat in the back row. As a community police officer, I should point out that entering private property without permission is trespassing, which is against the law. The room grew quiet. Nancy looked around nervously, realizing her plan was backfiring. She hadn't expected Karoline to come prepared with facts and support. Mr. Benson cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on supporting our existing community resources before asking private citizens to share their personal property. Now, about the community garden expansion. As the meeting moved on to other topics, Karoline caught Melissa's eye across the room. Her friend gave her a subtle thumbs up. The first round of this neighborhood battle had gone to Karoline, but she knew Nancy wouldn't give up easily. This was just the beginning. The day after the community meeting, Karoline felt a small sense of victory. Several neighbors had approached her afterward to express support. Mrs. Bennett, her elderly neighbor who had watched the original pool confrontation, even brought over a plate of cookies. I saw what those women did, Mrs. Bennett told her, walking into your yard like they owned the place. In my day, people respected property lines. Karoline thanked her for the cookies and support. It felt good to know not everyone was buying into Nancy's version of events, but her relief was short-lived. When Karoline checked her mailbox that afternoon, she found a flyer inside. At the top it read, Community Alert, in bold letters. Below was a poorly edited photo of Karoline's pool with text claiming, Local resident hoards cooling resources during record heat wave. The flyer announced a peaceful protest planned for Saturday in front of Karoline's house. Karoline's hands shook as she read the flyer. This was going too far. Nancy was not only invading her property but now organizing people to protest in front of her home. She immediately called Melissa. She can't do this, Karoline said, her voice tight with anger. This is harassment. You're right, it is. Melissa replied after Karoline read her the flyer. And I think we need to take this more seriously now. Nancy's not going to stop on her own. Melissa suggested they meet again with Greg to discuss options. That evening, they gathered at Karoline's kitchen table, joined by Diane, who had driven over as soon as she heard about the flyer. This crosses a line, Greg said, examining the flyer. Organizing a protest targeting a private residence could be considered harassment. I'm concerned this could escalate. What are my options? Karoline asked. You could file for a restraining order, Greg suggested, but that might take time. For now, I'll make sure patrol cars drive by your house regularly on Saturday. There's another approach we could take, Melissa said slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. What if we beat Nancy at her own game? What do you mean? Karoline asked. Nancy wants to make this about community resources, right? So let's Make it about community resources, but we'll control the narrative this time. They spent the next hour developing a plan. By the time everyone left, Karoline felt cautiously optimistic. Instead of dreading Saturday, she was looking forward to it. The next morning, Karoline went to City Hall and filed some paperwork with Greg's help. Afterward, she visited her shop to arrange coverage for Saturday. Then she stopped by the community pool and had a long talk with the manager, Sam Wilson. By the time she returned home, everything was in place. On Friday, Melissa's article appeared in the local newspaper. The headline read, "Local business owner sponsors community pool day." The article explained that Karoline Leavitt had arranged to cover entry fees for all residents at the community pool on Saturday. It mentioned the recent heat wave and how the community pool had been underutilized despite being a valuable town resource. The article included quotes from the pool manager about declining membership and the need for community support. Nowhere did it mention Nancy or the protest. It didn't need to. Karoline's phone rang all day Friday with calls from friends and neighbors, praising her generosity. Even the mayor called to thank her for supporting the community pool. The protest flyers mysteriously disappeared from mailboxes, replaced in some cases by copies of Melissa's article. Saturday morning arrived sunny and even hotter than the previous weekend. Karoline was nervous as she peeked out her front window, wondering if protesters would still show up despite her countermove. At 9 o'clock, a single car parked across the street. Nancy stepped out, wearing a Community First t-shirt and carrying a stack of signs. She looked around expectantly, clearly waiting for others to join her. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. No one else arrived. Nancy paced on the sidewalk, checking her phone repeatedly. Finally, a car pulled up. It was Patty, looking uncomfortable. "Where is everyone?" Nancy demanded, loud enough for Karoline to hear through her open window. "They're at the community pool," Patty said hesitantly. "It's free today, courtesy of Karoline Leavitt. Joan is already there with her kids. Everyone's talking about what a generous thing Karoline did." Nancy's face turned red. "This is ridiculous. She's just trying to distract from the real issue." "What is the real issue, Nancy?" Patty asked, sounding tired. "Karoline's right. We have a community pool. We've never used it because you said it was too crowded and poorly maintained. But I drove by this morning and it looks fine. The kids want to go swimming and it's free today." "So you're abandoning our protest?" Nancy's voice rose higher. Patty sighed. "There is no protest, Nancy. It's just you. Even the Johnsons took their kids to the pool and they were your biggest supporters. Look, I'm going to the pool too. You can come with me if you want." Nancy stood on the sidewalk alone after Patty drove away. She looked at Karoline's house, seeming to debate what to do next. Finally, she threw her protest signs into her car and drove off, tires screeching slightly. Karoline waited 30 minutes to make sure Nancy wasn't coming back. Then she changed into her swimsuit, packed a small bag, and headed to the community pool. When she arrived, she was amazed by what she saw. The pool was packed with families enjoying the water. Children laughed and played while parents chatted, in groups around the edge. Sam Wilson, the pool manager, greeted her with a huge smile. "Karoline, this is amazing. We haven't been this busy in years. People are even signing up for summer memberships. Whatever you did, it worked." Karoline spotted Melissa and Greg sitting at a table near the snack bar and joined them. "I can't believe how many people came," she said, looking around at the crowded pool. "People love free things," Melissa laughed. "But seriously, this was brilliant. Instead of fighting Nancy directly, you gave people a better option. Free swimming at a real community pool versus standing in the hot sun protesting outside your house? Easy choice." Greg nodded in agreement. "You turned Nancy's attack into something positive for the whole town. That's pretty impressive." As they were talking, Karoline noticed a familiar group on the other side of the pool. Joan was there with her children, looking like she was actually enjoying herself. A few tables away sat Patty with her family. There was no sign of Nancy. "You think Nancy will give up now?" Karoline asked. Melissa shook her head. "People like Nancy don't give up easily. She's probably regrouping, thinking of a new angle. But you've won a major battle here. The community is on your side now. Plus, Greg added, you've done something genuinely good for the town. The pool has been struggling for years. This might help save it. Karoline felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had defended her property rights while also helping her community in a meaningful way. As she looked around at the families enjoying the pool, she realized something important. Nancy had tried to make this about Karoline being selfish, but in the end, Karoline had proven who really cared about the community. But even as she enjoyed this moment of triumph, Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that Nancy wasn't done yet. This was just one round in what might become a longer battle. Whatever came next, though, Karoline now knew she had friends and allies who would stand with her. She wasn't facing Nancy alone anymore. The week after the successful community pool day passed peacefully. Karoline enjoyed a quiet Sunday by her own pool without any unwelcome visitors. On Monday, she returned to her gift shop feeling more relaxed than she had in days. Several customers mentioned reading about her sponsorship of the free pool day in the newspaper, and they praised her generosity. It was the least I could do for our community, Karoline told them with a genuine smile. She was proud of how she had handled the situation. But on Wednesday afternoon, Melissa rushed into the gift shop with a worried expression. You need to see this, she said, placing her tablet on the counter. It was open to a social media page called Fair Community News, Nancy's unofficial news blog. The newest post featured a blurry photo taken from a distance of Karoline's backyard. The headline read, Local business owner uses chemicals that harm environment. Experts concerned about backyard pool. What? Karoline exclaimed, quickly reading the article. It claimed that private pools used dangerous chemicals that could leak into the groundwater. Nancy had interviewed a local environmental expert named Dr. Alan Green, who expressed concerns about residential pools. The article ended by asking readers if they wanted toxic chemicals in their neighborhood. This is ridiculous, Karoline said. I use the same pool chemicals as the community pool, just in smaller amounts. And who is this Dr. Green? I've never heard of him. Melissa had already done some research. He's not even a real environmental scientist. He's Nancy's brother-in-law who has a PhD in business administration. He runs an online store selling natural cleaning products. Karoline sighed. She's not giving up, is she? No, but this is getting into dangerous territory, Melissa replied. She's making false claims about your business now. This could be considered defamation. That evening, Karoline met with Greg and Melissa again. This time, they were joined by Pete Johnson, a lawyer friend of Greg's who specialized in defamation cases. Based on what you've shown me, you have a strong case for defamation, Pete said after reviewing Nancy's article. She's making false claims that could harm your business reputation. We could send her a cease and desist letter. I don't want to escalate things with legal action unless absolutely necessary, Karoline said. There must be another way to handle this. They discussed various options. Finally, Melissa had an idea. What if we invite the actual town environmental officer to inspect your pool? Nancy is spreading misinformation about pool chemicals. Let's get the facts out there from a real authority. The next day, Karoline called the town's environmental department. She explained the situation to Bill Foster, the environmental compliance officer. He agreed to inspect her pool setup and provide an official report. This is actually a good opportunity, Bill told her when he arrived at her house that afternoon. There are a lot of misconceptions about residential pools. I've been wanting to create some educational materials for the community. Bill spent an hour testing Karoline's pool water and inspecting her filtration system and chemical storage. When he finished, he seemed impressed. Your pool maintenance is excellent, he told her. You're using all the recommended chemicals in appropriate amounts. Your storage methods are safe, and your filtration system is top-notch. I wish all residential pools were maintained this well. Bill offered to write an official report that Karoline could share publicly. He also mentioned that the environmental department had been planning a workshop on proper pool maintenance and asked if Karoline would consider hosting it at her house. We could use your pool as an example of proper maintenance, he explained. It would be a great educational opportunity for other pool owners in the community. Karoline readily agreed. The workshop was scheduled for the following Saturday. Melissa made sure the event was announced in the newspaper and online community groups. Meanwhile, Nancy was busy planning her next move. She didn't know about the environmental officer's inspection or the upcoming workshop. Instead, she was organizing what she called an environmental awareness protest outside Karoline's gift shop for the same Saturday. On Saturday morning, Karoline arrived at her shop earlier than usual. She wasn't surprised to see Nancy setting up across the street with a small group of supporters, fewer than before, but still determined. They carried signs with slogans like, "Say no to toxic pools," and "Protect our groundwater." Customers had to walk past the protesters to enter Karoline's shop. Some looked confused while others simply ignored Nancy's group. Inside, Karoline greeted everyone with a smile, offering them coffee and cookies. "What's going on outside?" one regular customer asked. "There seems to be some confusion about residential pool maintenance," Karoline explained calmly. "That's why. The town's environmental department is holding an educational workshop at my house this afternoon. Everyone is welcome to attend, including those protesters." She handed out flyers for the workshop to all her customers. Many seemed interested and promised to stop by. Around noon, Bill Foster from the environmental department arrived at the shop. He noticed the protesters and frowned. "Are those people claiming your pool is environmentally unsafe?" he asked Karoline. When she nodded, Bill walked straight across the street to Nancy's group. He introduced himself officially, showing his town ID badge. "I've personally inspected Miss Leavitt's pool," he told them. "It meets all environmental regulations and is actually a model of proper maintenance. If you have concerns about pool chemicals, I invite you all to attend the workshop at her house this afternoon. It's open to the public." Nancy looked stunned. To be confronted by an actual town official, her supporters began to whisper among themselves, some looking embarrassed. We're just concerned about the environment," Nancy stammered. "As am I," Bill replied. "That's why education is so important. Spreading misinformation doesn't help anyone. I hope to see you at the workshop." By 2 o'clock, Karoline's backyard was filled with neighbors and community members interested in learning about proper pool maintenance. Bill Foster had set up an informative display showing the different chemicals used in pools and explaining their purpose and proper handling. To Nancy's dismay, even some of her own supporters attended the workshop. People were genuinely interested in learning the facts. Bill's presentation was clear and educational, addressing common misconceptions about pool chemicals. He used Karoline's pool as a positive example throughout his talk. Properly maintained. Residential pools pose minimal environmental risk, Bill explained to the attentive crowd. The chemicals, when used correctly, break down into harmless compounds. What's actually harmful is misinformation that causes people to use chemicals incorrectly out of fear. Nancy stood at the back of the group, arms crossed, looking increasingly uncomfortable as Bill systematically disproved each of her claims from the article. When Bill finished his presentation and asked if anyone had questions, Nancy quietly slipped away without saying a word. After the workshop, several neighbors approached Karoline to apologize for believing Nancy's claims. Even Patty came up to her. "I'm sorry about all this," Patty said quietly. "Nancy convinced us you were doing something wrong, but it's clear she didn't have her facts straight. Your pool is beautiful, and it seems you take very good care of it." "Thank you," Karoline replied. "And everyone is welcome to attend the next community pool day. I'll be sponsoring another one next month." As people left, Melissa stayed behind to help clean up. "That went well," she said with a smile. "Nancy's credibility is pretty much destroyed now." "I hope it's finally over," Karoline said. "I never wanted this fight in the first place." Greg, who had been helping direct parking for the event, joined them. Unfortunately, people like Nancy rarely give up easily. They just change tactics. "What else could she possibly do?" Karoline asked. Greg shrugged. "I don't know, but stay alert. At least now the community knows the truth. You've handled this perfectly so far, turning each of her attacks into something positive for the town." Karoline looked around her backyard. Now peaceful again after the busy workshop. She had defended her property and her reputation while educating the community in the process. Whatever Nancy tried next, Karoline knew she could handle it. For nearly 2 weeks after the environmental workshop, Karoline enjoyed peaceful days at her shop and quiet evenings at home. Nancy seemed to have disappeared from public view. Some neighbors mentioned they hadn't seen her at her usual spots, around town. Karoline hoped this meant Nancy had finally given up her campaign against her. Melissa stopped by the gift shop one afternoon with good news. The article about the pool maintenance workshop got a huge response. Bill Foster said the environmental department has received calls from dozens of pool owners wanting information about proper chemical use. That's wonderful, Karoline said. At least something good came out of all this drama. And there's more, Melissa added with a smile. The community pool reported record membership signups last week. Your free pool day really reminded people what a great resource it is. Karoline felt a sense of satisfaction. Despite Nancy's attempts to paint her as selfish and environmentally irresponsible, she had actually helped the town in multiple ways. The community pool was thriving, and local pool owners were now better informed about proper maintenance. But her peace was short-lived. That evening, Karoline received a certified letter from the town council. With growing concern, she opened it and read that a complaint had been filed against her gift shop for zoning violations. According to the letter, someone had reported that Karoline was running an online business from her shop location, which allegedly violated the terms of her business license. Karoline immediately called Greg. "This has to be Nancy," she said after explaining about the letter. "I do have a small online shop where I sell some of my products, but that's completely allowed under my business license. I checked all the regulations before setting it up." "This definitely sounds like Nancy's work," Greg agreed. "She's trying a new angle since the others failed. Let me make some calls and see what I can find out." The next morning, Greg confirmed that Nancy had indeed filed the complaint. She submitted it through her husband's law firm to try to hide her involvement. The town clerk recognized the connection, though. "What should I do?" Karoline asked. "I have to respond to this letter within 10 days. "Don't worry," Greg assured her. "I know someone on the zoning board. This is clearly harassment and they'll see it that way too. But we should be prepared for the hearing." Over the next week, Karoline gathered all her business paperwork, including her original license application that clearly stated she would be selling products both in-store and online. Her accountant provided documentation showing how she properly reported both streams of income. The zoning board hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. Karoline was nervous as she arrived at the town hall, but she felt prepared. To her surprise, several local business owners were there to support her. Frank from the hardware store, Linda from the bakery, and even Sam Wilson from the community pool had come to stand with her. "We heard about what's happening," Frank told her. "This affects all of us. Many local shops are expanding online these days. If they rule against you, it could hurt everyone." Karoline was touched by their support. As they entered the meeting room, she saw Nancy sitting with her husband in the front row. Nancy looked smug, clearly believing she had finally found a way to cause real trouble for Karoline. The hearing began with the zoning board chairman explaining the complaint. Then Nancy's husband stood to present their case. He spoke in legal terms about commercial activity restrictions and residential zone protections, despite the fact that Karoline's shop was in a designated business district. When it was Karoline's turn to speak, she kept her comments simple and honest. She explained how her small business operated, how she had always followed all regulations, and how her online sales helped her stay competitive in challenging economic times. "Many small businesses in our town now sell online," she pointed out. "It's not just me. This is how local shops survive in today's market." Frank and the other business owners spoke up as well, confirming that they too had online components to their businesses. Linda from the bakery explained how she took orders online for special occasion cakes. Frank described how his hardware store offered online ordering with in-store pickup. The zoning board members listened carefully to everyone. Then they called a short recess to discuss the case. When they returned, the chairman looked directly at Nancy and her husband. The board finds this complaint to be without merit, he announced. Ms. Leavitt's business license clearly permits online sales as a component of her retail operation. Furthermore, we find this complaint to be part of a pattern of harassment. 3. Chairman then revealed that the board had received information about Nancy's previous actions against Karoline, including the trespassing incident, the failed protest, and the false environmental claims. This board will not be used as a tool for personal vendettas, he stated firmly. The complaint is dismissed. Ms. Leavitt's business is in full compliance with all town regulations. Nancy's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. Her husband tried to object, but the chairman cut him off. This matter is closed, he said, banging his gavel. As people left the meeting room, many stopped to congratulate Karoline. Even some town council members expressed their support. Nancy and her husband slipped out quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Outside the town hall, Melissa was waiting with Greg. "How did it go?" she asked eagerly. "They dismissed the complaint completely," Karoline told them, relief evident in her voice. The chairman even called out Nancy for harassment. "This might finally be the end of it," Greg said. "Nancy's credibility is completely shot now. She's been proven wrong publicly multiple times, and now she's been called out by the zoning board. Even her most loyal supporters will think twice before following her into another battle." A week later, Karoline was working in her shop when the bell over the door jingled. She looked up and was shocked to see Nancy standing there, looking uncomfortable. Karoline tensed, preparing for another confrontation. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. Nancy took a deep breath. "I came to apologize," she said, the words seeming difficult for her. "My husband says I need to stop before you file a harassment lawsuit. He says you would have a very strong case." Karoline remained silent, waiting for Nancy to continue. "I got carried away," Nancy admitted. "What started as a simple disagreement about your pool turned into something bigger. I convinced myself I was fighting for important principles, but really, I was just being stubborn and unreasonable." "Thank you for the apology," Karoline said simply. She wasn't sure she fully believed Nancy's sincerity, but she appreciated the effort nonetheless. "The town council asked me to resign from the neighborhood committee," Nancy added. "And several of my friends aren't speaking to me anymore. I didn't realize how my actions were affecting everyone." Karoline nodded, understanding that Nancy was facing real consequences for her behavior. "We all make mistakes," she said. "The important thing is to learn from them." Nancy looked relieved at Karoline's response. "Does this mean you won't sue me?" "I never wanted legal action," Karoline replied honestly. "I just wanted to be left in peace and have my property respected." After Nancy left, Karoline called Melissa and Greg to tell them about the unexpected visit. They met that evening at Karoline's house to celebrate what they hoped was the final resolution to the conflict. "I still can't believe Nancy actually apologized," Melissa said as they sat by Karoline's pool, enjoying the summer evening. "Fear of a lawsuit is a powerful motivator," Greg laughed. "But whatever her reasons, at least it's over." Karoline looked around at her peaceful backyard and the pool that had somehow become the center of so much drama. "You know what's ironic? After defending my private pool all summer, I'm actually thinking about hosting a real neighborhood pool party, not because anyone forced me to, but because I want to." Her friends smiled, understanding the difference. It was about choice and respect, not entitlement. Karoline had stood up for her rights while still finding ways to help her community. In the end, she had not only defended her property, but had also strengthened community bonds and improved town resources in the process. The following weekend, Karoline held her pool party. Nearly everyone in the neighborhood attended. Everyone, except Nancy, who had left town for a long vacation, according to her husband. As Karoline watched children playing in her pool and neighbors chatting happily on her patio, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had turned a negative situation into something positive, not just for herself but for the entire community.